Hello, this is the RPG Pundit, the final boss in Internet Shitlords. And this video today is a continuation, in a way, of the topic of my previous video, where I was pointing out how a major game designer wants to bring Maoism to RPGs, and that is to say, Monty Cook games and their 20-page rule guideline about consent in gaming. So this is a video where I'm going to be talking about some of the reactions that have happened and some of the counter arguments that the SJWs have tried to lay out with regards to, how they're defending this product and against my video, among other things. So you probably want to go back, so I don't have to spend 20 minutes just talking about what I talked about before. Go and check out that first video. Pause this, go over there. It's the previous video. Check it out and learn about what's going on if you haven't watched it yet. If you've already watched it, great. Then we can proceed. So, thing that happened is we've had conversation about this all over the internet. And, damn it, I'm trying to bring up something here on the screen, but not having much luck. Alright. There we are. Alright, so, talking about how on social media there have been all kinds of reactions from different people about this consent document, and I'm pleased to say that there's been a lot of real outrage about it, a lot of people that have been really pissed off about it. Of course, the SJWs have called all of those people horrible racists, right? And everything else, homophobes, whatever, that they're obviously hateful and terrible monsters. They probably voted for the Orange Man, and therefore they should be dredged out of the hobby forever. Now, of course, they don't always say that. Sometimes they say that, and then 2 seconds later, when they're having an argument with someone like me, they say, no one is saying you have to apply these. You're pretending like this is going to be forced on people. Nobody's going to force it. And then 2 seconds after they say that, they go back to saying everybody who doesn't accept this should be driven out of the hobby, right? So, what are we supposed to think? Do they really think they're fooling anyone? Can we not see what they're saying? Right? And so that's the really surface level idiocy of all this. But I want to talk about some more slightly nuanced points. But before that, I want to point out that apparently Sean K. Reynolds, who is one of the two people who helped write the product, because if the product is a Monty Cook's Games product, the people principally listed as the authors are Sean Reynolds and Shannon Jermaine, and more on her later. But Sean Reynolds came out and said something about this. He said on an RPG forum, for some reason there are people who think the consent PDF is arguing that one person with a fear of spiders gets to cancel an entire campaign about fighting drow. If the DM plans to run a spidery drow campaign and 4 or 5 players are all in for that, and the arachnophobe player doesn't want to play that, there is nothing wrong with the arachnophobe not attending these games. There will always be more games to play in the future. So that's the first thing I wanted to quote of his. And then, let me see if I can bring up the second here. Sorry, that was actually the second thing. This is the first, but it doesn't matter. Quoting his own thing, it says in the book, in the PDF on consent, it says, anyone is allowed to leave an uncomfortable situation at any time. Each person's feeling of comfort and safety are more important than participating in the game. If a problematic situation comes up, it's all right if they step out. It doesn't matter the circumstances of how it's in the game. Maybe someone made a joke, or an aspect slipped into the scenario accidentally, or it's being introduced despite that person not having consented to it. The person who's feeling uncomfortable doesn't have to confront the group about it. They can just leave the table. If they don't feel comfortable to talk to anyone about it, or don't think the situation will change, it's fine not to play in that game for a while or permanently. So that's the quote directly from the book, and that's the second part. What I had was Sean's writing about this in a forum where he was commenting that argument. And there's one thing that he doesn't seem to get here, right? Like he thinks the reason that we are arguing correctly that this product is set up to sabotage gaming groups, it's set up so that one person can sabotage an entire gaming group, is because all of the language in this text is directed not at the group, but at the person with the grievance, right? At the victim, at the triggered person, right? Even here, look at the quote. Anyone is allowed to leave an uncomfortable situation at any time. Your feelings, so it says you can leave, right? The person who is offended can leave. But nowhere in the entire book does it say that the DM is allowed to tell that person, well, you just shouldn't play. That's not allowed, right? That's not what they want you to be able to do, right? If the person who has a fear of spiders wants to play Vault of the Drow and doesn't want to walk away from the table, they should have a right, according to this book, to sit there, and the other players and the DM, if they try to question why, that's strictly not allowed. The book itself says you are not allowed to question anyone about why they are triggered, right? So you can't question them. And you can't just, and nowhere in the book does it say you can ask them to leave, right? Nowhere in the book does it say the DM ultimately has the right to kick any asshole off of the table that he wants, right? So you're only recognizing the right of the supposed triggered victim to leave the table. You're not recognizing the right of anybody else at the table to leave. There's a reason why this was written out this way. Well, there's more than one reason. One reason is because these are people who, in a broad sense, support the postmodernist goal of the collapse of our Western civilization. But that's kind of meta, right? Let's look at the more immediate reason. The more immediate reason has everything to do with Shannon Jermaine. Shannon Jermaine, and I want to preface by saying that I'm not doxing her in any way here, because this is something she's completely open about. You look up her bio, it'll be right there on her bio. She links to it, she promotes it even in gaming contexts, right? So she's not, it's not that I'm revealing some secret about her, okay? Just so you know. Shannon Jermaine is apparently a big person in the bondage scene in her area, right? The BDSM crowd, right? And she's written even books about BDSM, right? So she is writing and using, when she writes about consent, and when Sean here writes about consent, all of the language that they use, all of the structure that they use, is the language and structure of the BDSM kink scene. Now, in that scene, in a way, it makes a lot of sense that the person being triggered should be the only one with any rights. You know, that person should be the only one that has the power in that situation. Ironically, because usually it's probably because they're the submissive or something. This is they're about to be triggered by something, right? But that's why it's all a pantomime, right? But anyways, that person has to be protected. Why? Because you're talking about a much more sensitive environment. The BDSM environment is an environment that is full of sex. It's an environment that's full of sexual fetishes. And it's an environment that has, therefore, an enormous potential for abuse, right? An enormous possibility that somebody being involved there could end up, raping someone, right? Now, gaming does not have that same potential. It is a completely different scale, right? The average, unless you happen to somehow end up in a gaming group that is doing live action role play of Alpha Blue or something like that, right? There's a completely explicit version. There's none of that same context there. The context is not if you don't have the absolute power to demand consent or to refuse consent, you will possibly be raped, and therefore we need very, very strict rules to protect the situation, to avoid something like that even having a chance of happening. This is, if you don't have the absolute right to consent and you don't want to leave the table, then you're just an asshole, right? Because all you're doing is saying, even make-believe spiders, I'm going to pretend that make-believe spiders trigger me, right? Because let's face it, okay, let's be as absolutely altruistic as possible and assume that this is somebody that is genuinely triggered to the point of incapacitation by spiders or by dehydration or by police aggression in role-playing games, right? Well, no, in real life, right? In role-playing games, they aren't actually encountering any of those things, just the mention of those things. So this is someone so dysfunctional, so messed up, that even the mention of something like police aggression or dehydration or rats or spiders is going to make them completely collapse as a human being, right? That person shouldn't be gaming at all, right? But if they are, that should not be the one person who has the veto power to dominate the entire rest of the group. And we've seen other arguments being made by people that well, that's not what we're saying here. That's not the case, really. Except that that's very obviously what is happening, right? And if you try to argue that the DM, in any of the cases where I've seen this subject being debated in social media, anyone who tries to argue, well, shouldn't we have the right to tell someone that they just can't play in our game? The answer is always, oh, so you care more about the game than people's feelings, right? Like as if it's tremendously selfish of you to want the game to be good for yourself and for other people, even at the cost of one person, right? So like if there's a group of 6 players, right? What the SJWs are arguing is that one player has to be catered to in every possible way, even to the point of ruining the experience of the other 5 people at the table, right? So who's being selfish here? The fact is, this is an argument that comes down to a fundamental division in our society, because what we have is an argument here that says that we have to mollycoddle to an extreme extent, to the extent of completely bending over backward to accommodate in every way what are fundamentally abnormal people, right? In the sense of there is a norm. The norm is most people don't collapse into a crying heap at the mention of police aggression or dehydration or spiders, right? That's the norm, we're going to call it. So if you do collapse into a crying heap at the mention of dehydration, then you are outside of the norm of mental health, the norm of typical social behavior, whatever you want to call it. And this is the fundamental debate of the entire culture war. This is it, right there. That there is one side that is, the vast majority of people are what my friend Kurt Schlichter calls militant normals, right? That is to say, extremely normal human beings, right? As in people that fit within the norms of our Western society. Now, I want to point out that there's nobody who is absolutely normal. Everybody is not normal in some way. So we all feel a sympathy, and thank goodness for that, for everybody who's also not normal, because none of us, normal is an idealized state, right? It's the state of what we consider the default norm of our culture. If someone would actually perfectly fit that default norm, if they were absolutely totally normal, they would be the weirdest freaking creation, right? They would be just bizarre beyond belief, right? Everyone is weird in some way. We don't fit that norm in some way or another. Every single one of us, right? And so it's not a question of saying, oh, well, this is about people who fit in trying to kick out people that don't fit in. No. This is about the toleration of that difference, but that we're going to work in order to have a functioning society within a norm, within the bounds of a norm, and that norm has to come first ultimately, right? With the rejoinder, though, that we allow the maximum personal liberty for every individual, right? This is the Enlightenment ideal. It says that you can be exactly the way that you want. That's perfectly fine. What you can't do is force everybody else, force society to change itself in order to celebrate and facilitate you being the way that you want. You could be the way that you want without, and society shouldn't punish you for it. It shouldn't attack you for it, right? Nobody, because I've seen a lot of people on social media basically going, oh, so what you want to do? I don't know. If it's because you want to persecute gay people, right? That you don't want consent in RPGs, right, or something like that. There is nobody within the cultural mainstream that wants to persecute gays. Sorry, within our cultural mainstream. Because I should point out that there are some people that a lot of left-wing BDS fans are wonderful. I don't mean BDSM, by the way. I mean BDS, boycott, divest, and sanction fans, are great fans of, that love to throw homosexual people off tall buildings, right? And somehow those people are okay. But of course they're okay because it's our norms that the left is at war with, not their norms, right? They are allowed to throw as many gay people off buildings as they like, and the left will still cheer them as the religion of peace, right? But if we do it, you know, if anything, if we don't, never mind that, if we were to question something like open fornication in the streets, that would be enough for us to be horrible monsters to them, right? Because it's not really about religion, it's not really about sex, it's about the war on normality, right? The war on the central pillar of values that make up a civilization, okay? So there is this norm that nobody totally fits into, that we all tolerate all extremes that are outside of that norm in our society, in our modern Enlightenment Western society. That's what makes our society so awesome. Because you see, other societies don't. Other societies will throw people off buildings for not fitting in that norm. We don't do that. We've rejected that idea, right? What we do is we let everybody be themselves, with the understanding that also means that the majority should have the right to be themselves, right? That they should get to be who they are and not be attacked for being who they are, right? That we should all just be allowed as individuals to express our individuality. And the fact is that the vast majority of people, their individuality is somewhere well within that line of the cultural norm, however boring you might think it is, right? Like, I'm not. I'm kind of weird, right? And so are a lot of gamers, right? But there are, even there, the majority of gamers are like your average Joe that goes to work, you know, drives a car, you know, he has 5 kids, 2 to 5 kids, right? He works 9 to 5, he has a wife, he might have a dog, I don't know, a car, you know, a house. He basically like Venger Satanis, something like that. That's a boringly normal person, right? They're not unusual and fantastically interesting like myself or some other people. But they are that, right? So that is the center part, right? And this is a battle between people who think that the center should be destroyed, right? Versus the ones that think the center should be preserved, right? It's a fight between people who, to put it more directly in the context of this debate on consent, there are people like Sean and Shanna and all of the people who have been basically, you know, calling for the kicking out of anyone who doesn't immediately and unquestioningly accept the consent rules from our hobby. Those people think that the dysfunctional or the abnormal should be able to control, and everybody else should have to adapt themselves to whatever demands that abnormality does, right? But you'll notice that it's never the other way around. It's never that anyone that is normal should get that, right? Like if a normal person is triggered by something, it doesn't matter. That's not important to these people because the goal isn't really about protecting anyone, right? If it was, the first thing you'd want to be doing is protecting the center of our Western civilization. You'd want to be protecting that core because everybody, all these people, all the people who are victimized, all the people who are the underclasses, all the minorities, all the people who are disabled, who are weak, who are in any way potential victims are going to be the ones that are going to suffer the most if our society falls apart. And yet, that's exactly what the SJW crowd seem to want. They want, instead of saying, you know, if there's one person who is abnormal, they should be able to shut down the entire RPG scene rather than have to bow to leave a game, right? To just leave a game, because that's all they have to do, right? That's everybody's right, is to leave the game. But But the feelings or the interests or the goals or what is wanted by the 5 normal people in the gaming group doesn't matter. It doesn't matter to them at all, right? That's not important. What's important to them is that one person get to hold the entire hobby hostage. That's what they want. And they would see that as a tremendous victory, even if it means that 90% of the hobby, the militant normals, walk away. They would rather be kings of a ruin than have to tolerate a hobby that continues to reflect the mainstream of society. So this is something to think about. That's what they're attacking us with. I'm saying not what about the one person who's triggered. I'm saying what about the other 5 people at the table? What about them? What about what they care about, right? If they want to run the Lair of the Spider Queen, right, then why does that one person get to hold everybody else hostage, right? That person, and you could say, oh, well, you care more about playing the game than about your friend, because that person might be your friend. Well, maybe, you might be at a con, in which case that person isn't your friend. And does that person then get to cancel your game at the con because they're triggered by spiders and they know that the game is going to be about spiders because you're going to put the ad there running Lair of the Spider Queen or whatever? Are they going to be allowed now to sit down to say, sorry, I'm triggered by spiders, but I really want to play, so you're going to have to change all the spiders, right? That's how they talk. And then the DM will be like, wait, hang on a second. This is about spiders, right? And they're like, yeah, but you have to change it because I'm triggered by spiders. So do they then get to say, well, because you can see that in the con that I've already seen documentation. People have been mailing shit to me since this whole thing blew open. And there's already immediately been cons that have said, we're going to implement these rules, right? We're going to implement these consent rules. So how much do you want to bet that if it comes down to it, these concerts are all going to be run by SJWs anyways, right? That when the SJW sits down at a table that's running Lair of the Spider Queen and says, I'm triggered by spiders, the person who's going to end up being dragged away from that table is the DM and not the victim, not the triggered person, right? Not the professional victim. That's what's going to happen. Right, but let's say it is your friend. Let's say it's that you're a gaming group with your friend. What kind of a goddamn friend are you that you're gonna ruin the fun of everybody else? If you've got a group of 6 people who are all good friends, and they've been planning to do one thing for months, and they're getting together to do it, and you decide at that point to tell them all that they can't do it because you yourself do not feel comfortable doing it, even if it was true, right? So let's assume that it is. What kind of narcissism is that? Well, obviously, it's the kind of narcissism that SJWs want to push on everybody in society, that everything in society should be about attending to the narcissism of the special snowflakes, right? But think about it. Isn't that goddamn horrible? Wouldn't that person just be the worst friend in the world? To say, well, I'm going to ruin the fun of 5 of my closest friends because I have a problem, instead of sitting out this campaign. I'm going to force them to play what I want to play instead. Like, what kind of friend is that, right? So, again, these arguments are completely specious arguments, and they come out of this fundamental point, which is that the consent rules that they're trying to force on the hobby are consent rules that are set up to sabotage the way RPGs are meant to work. They're meant to sabotage the hierarchy because they're filled up to their asses in occultism, right? That wants to tear down the entire structure of our culture, right? And so they want to tear down the structure of RPGs in order to achieve that, right? As one tiny part of a much bigger culture war where all norms must be torn away, where there must be no center, right? It's the difference between the idea of having a society that has a core center, that has something that binds everyone together, that we all kind of agree on, and a society with no center. And you know what a society with no center is? It's a society that's collapsing. That's the only type of society that has no center. That society cannot hold. That society will fall apart. So this is why some of us are pissed off at this, because we know, first of all, we know what you're doing, SJWs. We know what Sean Reynolds and Shannon Jermaine and Monty Cook are doing. We know what their real intentions are for the hobby. But we also know what this is doing, with them being tiny stooges or pawns in the much larger scheme of this culture war that is being waged by the modern neo-Marxist left on Western society and what that means too. That's everything for today. If you like this video, please subscribe. Please share this video anywhere you can, because that's one of the biggest helps you can give me. If you've subscribed, hit that notification bell to make sure, because a lot of times, Google and YouTube will screw around with people. If you subscribe now, check in a month, make sure that you haven't missed. I post about once every 5 days nowadays. So if more than that has gone by and I haven't posted, check to make sure they haven't unsubscribed you by accident, right? Because apparently they have a lot of those kinds of accidents as long as the speaker is conservative. If you want to support me, I've got a Patreon page and a PayPal link, but probably the best way you can support me is by picking up my products like Dark Albion, which is a complete D&D setting of medieval authentic setting in the War of the Roses, or Lion and Dragon, which is a complete OSR RPG for medieval authentic roleplay. Or pick up, if you don't, those aren't all as expensive as they look. They look beautiful, but they're actually quite reasonably priced. But if you're hard for cash and you just want to give me a smaller tip, you could say, instead of PayPal or Patreon, why not check out the RPG Pundit Presents PDF series? The link is in the description below, and you'll see we're now up to, I think, 91 or 92 issues, like just a ridiculous amount of issues. And every issue, it costs between 99 cents and I think $4.99. And each issue is a PDF that's between, 7 to 20 pages long, depending, that has some kind of source material. It could be an adventure, it could be random tables, it could be new rules, new spell, new magical stuff, new magical systems, lists of items, monsters, all kinds of things like that. Either of the medieval authentic type or of the gonzo weird fantasy role-playing type. And check it out. We've got almost 100 issues, and you're bound to find something that you'll find it piques your interest. That way you're paying me some money, but you're also getting something interesting that you can use in your gaming. And this is all about actually gaming, right? So thank you very much to everyone who's listened. Again, please share. This is the RPG Pundit, currently smoking Lorenzetti Volcano plus Blue Boar.